The waves rolled steadily beneath the sleek, dark hull of the small reconnaissance boat as it cut through the waters off the Australian coast in May 2004. The midday sun reflected off the endless blue, the salt air thick and familiar. Lieutenant Eric Davis stood near the edge, gripping the rail, scanning the horizon. He had spent years training for unpredictable situations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what was about to unfold. Davis was 34, a disciplined and highly skilled officer. Known for his sharp instincts and steady composure under pressure, he had completed multiple deployments, excelling in high-risk operations, but this was just a routine training mission. Navigation drills, tactical maneuvering, and small team coordination. The crew of 6 was relaxed, performing their tasks with ease, confident in the controlled nature of the exercise. As they neared a shallow stretch of water, one of the men pointed to a dark shadow moving beneath the surface. At first it seemed distant, a mere shape gliding through the depths. But as the boat slowed, the form grew clearer. A great white shark, at least 15 feet long, was circling beneath them, its powerful body cutting smoothly through the water. The crew watched in quiet awe. Great whites were not uncommon in these waters, and while their presence was always a reminder of the ocean's raw, untamed nature, they rarely posed a direct threat to boats. The shark moved with rapid motions, its dorsal fin slicing through the surface before dipping back down. It seemed indifferent to them, uninterested in the vessel floating above. And then it changed direction. The shark accelerated, turning sharply toward the boat, its movements no longer casual but purposeful. It swam parallel for a moment, as if sizing up the craft, before vanishing beneath the surface. The sudden shift in its behavior sent a ripple of unease through the crew. Before anyone could react, the water exploded. The great white lunged upward, its massive head crashing against the side of the boat with staggering force. The impact sent a violent jolt through the vessel, knocking several men off their feet. The boat rocked dangerously, the metal hull groaning under the unexpected blow. Eric Davis, standing closest to the rail, felt his footing give way. The force of the strike sent him sprawling backward, and before he could catch himself, his body pitched over the edge. Cold water engulfed him. The shock hit first, the disorienting rush of salt water filling his mouth, his nose, his ears. He kicked hard, breaking the surface, gasping for air. His crew was already moving, shouts filling the air, and hands scrambling to throw him a rope. But before he could reach for it, the shadow beneath him shifted. The shark had turned back. It moved even faster now. Davis desperately looked around him, but there was nothing he could use to save himself. The shark struck from below, ramming him with astonishing force that had sent him flying in the air. Then the teeth came. A row of razor-sharp fangs clamped down on his torso, slicing through flesh and muscle in a single devastating bite. A searing pain ripped through his body as the shark's powerful jaws crushed into him, dragging him under. The crew watched in horror as the sea churned violently, their commanding officer vanishing beneath the surface. A desperate scramble erupted on deck. Ropes thrown, arms reaching, weapons grabbed, but none of it mattered. The shark wasn't finished. Below the surface, Davis fought with everything he had. He thrashed, struggling against the crushing force of the predator's grip, but the power of the beast was overwhelming. It shook its head violently, tearing through muscle and bone, the movement ripping him apart with terrifying efficiency. His vision blurred as pain flooded his body, his lungs burning as his last reserves of air disappeared. The great white released him for a moment, repositioning its grip. A brief, agonizing second of weightlessness passed before the final strike came. The jaws closed again, pulling him deeper. Above, the water's surface rippled, then stilled. The ocean swallowed the chaos, leaving behind only the eerie, spreading stain of blood. The crew stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Seconds stretched into an eternity before someone moved, yanking the throttle, turning the boat in a frantic circle. A man dove in, searching the depths, but there was nothing left to find. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, there was no sign of Lieutenant Davis. Only the vast, indifferent ocean remained. The official reports would later describe the attack as highly unusual, an aggressive and unprovoked incident. Experts speculated that the shark had been drawn by the vibrations of the boat, triggered by the sudden movement of the crew. Others argued that it had mistaken the vessel for a wounded animal, acting on instinct rather than intent. None of it mattered to those who had been there. For the people aboard that boat, the ocean would never be the same. The waters off the coast of South Africa were calm that morning, the early sunlight shimmering across the surface as the boat rocked gently, anchored near a popular shark cage dive site. Megan and Chloe, both avid travelers, were visiting the region for a thrilling expedition. The ocean had always drawn them in, and this was to be their greatest adventure yet, diving into the world of great white sharks. The pair had spent months planning their trip, excited by the idea of encountering one of the ocean's most feared predators from the safety of a cage. Megan, the more adventurous of the two, was quick to dive into any challenge. Chloe, quieter but equally curious, often found herself following Megan's lead, always trusting her friend's enthusiasm. Together they made the perfect pair, balanced in their approach to life and exploration, but each with a deep respect for nature and its wonders. The plan was simple. They would enter the cage and descend into the clear blue depths to get an up-close look at the sharks. They had done their research. They knew that the sharks were dangerous, but the cage would provide a safe buffer, allowing them to observe the creatures without worry. The day began as expected, with the group entering the water and watching in awe as the sharks swam lazily around them. It was an experience they had dreamed of for years, but the mood shifted when the dive guide noticed a larger shark approaching, one that was much more active than the others. The shark, a great white, was circling the cage cautiously at first, clearly interested but not yet displaying any signs of aggression. The group stayed calm, each of them fascinated by the sheer size of the creature. But as time went on, the shark grew bolder, moving closer and closer to the cage. Megan and Chloe, floating just outside the cage in the water, exchanged excited glances, oblivious to the increasing danger. It wasn't until the shark suddenly lunged toward the cage, slamming into it with incredible force, that the calm was shattered. The impact reverberated through the water, and in that moment, everything changed. The shark, now agitated, began to circle faster, its movements more erratic. The group scrambled to get back inside the cage, but the shark's movements became unpredictable. Unbeknownst to anyone on board, Megan and Chloe had drifted too far from the boat and the cage. They had been caught in the excitement of the moment, mesmerized by the shark's presence, and hadn't noticed how far they had swum from safety. As the shark turned its attention to the boat, the crew on board scrambled to react. The boat's captain shouted instructions, but it was already too late. The shark, sensing the movement of the women, swam toward them with terrifying speed. Megan was the first to notice the danger, and her heart raced as she realized how far from safety they were. Before she could signal Chloe, the shark struck. Its massive jaws closed around Chloe's torso, pulling her beneath the surface with terrifying force. Megan screamed, kicking frantically to swim toward her friend, but the water turned red as Chloe's body disappeared into the depths. The panic was instantaneous. Megan tried to swim back toward the boat, her eyes searching the water frantically, but the shark was not finished. It surged toward her, its jaws opening wide, and with a single horrifying motion, it lunged at Megan. The force of the impact knocked her into the water, and the shark grabbed her leg, pulling her under. The water around her turned dark as she was dragged into the depths, her body twisting helplessly in the grip of the predator. The crew had been watching in horror, unable to reach them in time. The boat's captain called for immediate help, but they could do nothing but helplessly watch as the water began to settle. Megan and Chloe were gone. The shark, after a few tense moments, retreated into the depths, leaving nothing but silence. It wasn't until hours later that the Coast Guard launched a full search operation. By that time, there was no hope of finding the women alive. The boat crew could provide no additional details about the incident. All they could confirm was that both women had vanished without a trace. The search continued for several hours, with no sign of Megan or Chloe. It wasn't until a large great white shark was caught in a nearby fishing net that the full horror of the situation was revealed. The shark, a massive specimen, had been caught alive. When it was hauled aboard, the crew was horrified to discover the remains of both Megan and Chloe inside its stomach. Their bodies, though torn and mutilated, were unmistakably recognizable. The women's families were devastated by the confirmation of their deaths. The shark had likely been attracted to their movements in the water, mistaking them for prey. Experts speculated that the splashing and frantic movements of the women had drawn the shark's attention, triggering an aggressive response from the predator. The shark had attacked with brutal force, pulling the women into the water and killing them almost instantly. In the days following the discovery, debates erupted about the dangers of shark diving and the unpredictability of great white sharks. While the sharks were typically calm in the area, this attack had proven that even the most experienced divers could become victims. The tragic deaths of Megan and Chloe sparked renewed discussions about safety protocols for tourists in shark-infested waters, and raised questions about the ethics of shark cage diving. April 7, 2023, the Indian Ocean stretched endlessly under the midday sun. The sky was clear, the waves rolling gently against the surface. A small fishing boat bobbed in the water, its engine humming as it drifted farther from the shore. Aboard was Paul Jennings, 48, a seasoned fisherman from Perth, Australia. He had spent most of his life on the water, fishing along the vast coastlines. Raised in Western Australia, Paul had learned the ways of the ocean from his father, who had once been a deep-sea diver. Over the years, Paul had developed an unmatched skill in reading the waves, predicting storms, and navigating the open sea. Despite his experience, this trip was different. He was fishing alone, something he rarely did. His usual crew was unavailable, but he had insisted on taking the boat out by himself. He had done it countless times before, always returning with fresh catches to sell at the local market. The morning had been uneventful. The waters were calm, the fish biting. Paul had filled half his storage bins with tuna and snapper. Satisfied with the day's work, he had planned to head back before sunset. Then everything changed. Without warning, the sky darkened, the once clear horizon swallowed by fast-moving clouds. The wind picked up, sending waves crashing against the side of the boat. Paul's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but before he could react, a massive wave surged toward him. The impact was violent. The boat flipped, sending Paul plunging into the water. For a moment, everything was silent beneath the waves. The ocean surrounded him, cold and endless. His lungs burned as he kicked toward the surface, gasping for air as he broke through. His boat was gone. The wreckage drifted nearby, pieces of wood and fishing gear floating in the water. The radio was lost, and the emergency beacon was nowhere in sight. Paul fought against the waves, scanning the ocean for anything to keep him afloat. Then in the distance he saw it, a rocky outcrop, jutting out from the water like an island. It was his only chance. He swam with everything he had, his arms burning, his legs aching. The current pushed against him, dragging him sideways, but he refused to give in. After what felt like hours, he reached the rocks, his fingers gripping the sharp edges as he pulled himself up. His body collapsed against the stone, chest heaving. The ocean stretched in every direction, endless and empty. Paul was alone, but the real nightmare had yet to begin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the water shifted. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface, circling just beyond the reach of the waves. Paul watched in horror as the first dorsal fin broke through, slicing through the water like a knife. Then another. The oceanic white-tip sharks had arrived. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Indian Ocean into darkness. The air was thick with salt, and the sound of waves crashing against the rock was the only thing breaking the silence. Paul Jennings sat hunched on the cold, jagged surface, his body aching from exhaustion. His clothes were soaked with seawater, and his hands had cuts from gripping the sharp edges as he had pulled himself out of the water. His throat burned with thirst, his stomach tight with hunger. But the worst was the fear creeping over him. The ocean was not empty. Beneath the moonlit waves, dark shadows circled, their movements slow, deliberate. The oceanic white-tip sharks had not left. They knew he was there. Paul had heard stories before, tales of sailors and pilots stranded in the open sea, surrounded by these relentless predators. White-tips were not like other sharks. They did not lose interest. They waited. The night was long. Paul's muscles stiffened as he sat curled against the rock, trying to stay awake. He could not afford to slip. The sea was just below, and the sharks were just out of reach. Hours passed. Then, at dawn, hope arrived. A rescue helicopter appeared in the distance, its blades slicing through the air, the sound growing louder as it neared. Paul scrambled to his feet, his legs weak beneath him. He waved frantically, his arms aching with the effort. The pilot saw him. The chopper hovered over the rock, preparing to lower a rescue line. Then, the ocean erupted. A shark lunged from the water, its powerful body launching upward. Its teeth clamped down on Paul's leg, dragging him backward. He fell, his body hitting the rock hard before being pulled into the sea. The water turned red. Paul thrashed, his hands clawing against the surface, but the sharks were relentless. Another fin cut through the waves, then another. Within seconds, the predators swarmed, their bodies twisting in a frenzy. The rescue team could only watch as the water churned, and Paul's outstretched hand disappeared beneath the foaming sea. By the time the helicopter descended, nothing remained. Only a single boot floated nearby, turning slowly in the waves, and a deep crimson stain spread through the water before fading into the vast blue. The ocean had taken everything. The incident was reported immediately. The Coast Guard launched a search for remains, but nothing was found. Paul was gone. Officials listed the event as a tragic shark attack, though some questioned how long the sharks had been circling before they struck. News of his disappearance spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the fishing community. Those who had known him mourned the loss, struggling to accept how a man who had spent his life on the sea had been swallowed by it. The waters off the Indian Ocean remained the same, the waves rolling gently against the shore as if nothing had happened. But to those who had witnessed the attack, the sight of Paul's final moments would never be forgotten. September 3, 2024, the ocean near Miami, Florida, was calm and peaceful beneath the moonlit sky. Gentle waves rolled slowly toward the shore, creating quiet sounds that filled the warm night air. A private yacht floated a few hundred feet from the sandy beach, music playing softly and laughter drifting over the water. On board was 30-year-old Mark Reynolds, who was celebrating his bachelor party. Mark had always loved the ocean. Born in Orlando, Florida, he grew up swimming, fishing, and spending endless days at the beach. He worked as an electrician, respected for his hard work and friendly personality. Soon he would marry his fiancée, Sarah Miller, whom he had met 5 years earlier at a local concert. Their wedding was just a week away. Joining Mark for this celebration were his closest friends. Ryan Johnson, 32, his childhood friend from school, had organized the party. Ryan was known for his jokes and fun-loving spirit. Also, there was Mike Anderson, 29, who had traveled from Tampa. He was a firefighter and always watched out for everyone. With them was Luke Carter, 28, from Miami, a professional diver who had spent years exploring Florida's underwater world. Finally, there was Mark's younger cousin, Alex Reynolds, 25, known for being quiet but always reliable. The group had spent the evening laughing, eating, and drinking on board the rented yacht. Music played in the background, and the friends enjoyed stories and jokes under the stars. As the night went on, they decided to take a quick swim. The warm water seemed inviting, shimmering in the moonlight. They jumped into the ocean, laughing and splashing each other. The water was clear, reflecting the moonlight, creating a perfect scene. Mark swam farther away from the others, enjoying the quiet and freedom of the open water. None of them noticed the dark shape slowly circling below. It moved silently, drawn by their splashing. It was a massive tiger shark, measuring over 12 feet long, its powerful body built for hunting. Suddenly, the water rippled. Mark felt something brush against his leg but thought it was one of his friends playing around. Then, without warning, the shark attacked. The massive tiger shark surged upward, biting deep into Mark's leg. Its razor-sharp teeth sank through his flesh, tearing muscles and breaking bones instantly. Mark screamed, pain flooding his body as blood spilled into the water. His friends froze, staring in shock. The shark shook Mark violently, splashing water everywhere and dragging him under. Panic erupted. Everyone tried to swim toward him, but fear slowed their movements. The shark surged upward again, its powerful jaws biting deeper into Mark's body. His arms flailed weakly, and he gasped desperately for air, struggling to break free. The water turned dark red. The shark refused to let go. Mark fought, reaching desperately toward his friends, but he could not escape. Luke, the diver, swam toward him, trying to help, but the shark was too powerful, too aggressive. It bit down harder, pulling Mark deeper into the water, out of sight. The waves calmed once more, leaving only red-stained water behind. The friends stared at the spot where Mark had vanished. Fear and disbelief filled their eyes. They called out his name, but there was no answer. Just silence, and the endless darkness of the ocean around them. They knew the attack was not over. They felt helpless, afraid, and trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. In the distance, the yacht's crew shouted, throwing life preservers into the water. But it was already too late. Mark was gone, taken by a predator they never saw coming. The ocean was quiet again, hiding what had just happened beneath its calm surface. The yacht's crew rushed to pull the frightened friends from the water. They climbed aboard, shaking, their hearts beating fast, and eyes fixed on the ocean that had taken Mark away. No one spoke. Their faces were pale, minds replaying the nightmare they had just witnessed. Lifeguards and rescuers arrived quickly, searching the area carefully, but they found only small pieces of Mark's body scattered in the water. His surf shorts floated, torn apart, along with pieces of skin and bone left behind by the shark. Back on shore, Mark's fiancée, Emily Parker, waited anxiously. She had been preparing for their wedding, excited for their future together. When she got the call from Mark's friends, her world fell apart. She collapsed in shock, unable to believe Mark had been taken from her. Emily had spent weeks planning their wedding. She had picked out flowers, chosen her dress, and sent out invitations. Now, instead of a wedding, she had to plan a funeral. The bright future she imagined was gone, replaced by sadness and emptiness. News of the shark attack spread quickly through the community. People were shocked. Tiger sharks were known to live near the Bahamas, but deadly attacks like this were very rare. Experts studied the attack closely, calling it extremely aggressive and unusual. They believed Mark's splashing and swimming might have attracted the shark, thinking he was easy prey. Wildlife authorities warned swimmers and tourists to stay cautious in the water, putting signs up along beaches to remind people of the hidden dangers beneath the waves. Mark's friends returned home, haunted by what happened. Ryan, his best friend, blamed himself. He wished he had never planned the party, believing Mark would still be alive if they had stayed on the boat. Nightmares filled his sleep, and he avoided the beach for months, afraid of the water that had taken his friend. Emily moved away from the coast, unable to face the ocean again. Every time she looked at the water, she remembered Mark's smile, his laughter, and the horrible way he died. Friends tried to comfort her, but nothing eased the pain. Her grief was deep, something no words could heal. Local authorities placed warning signs along the beaches, reminding swimmers of the attack and urging them to stay cautious. For weeks, tourists avoided the water, but slowly, as time passed, people returned to swimming and surfing, the memory fading into history. But for Emily and Mark's family, life would never be the same. Holidays felt empty without him. His parents often visited the beach, leaving flowers near the spot where his life ended so suddenly. They stood quietly, looking at the ocean, wondering why something so terrible had happened to someone they loved so much. Authorities officially marked it as one of the most violent shark attacks ever seen in the Bahamas. Wildlife experts continued studying tiger sharks, hoping to understand why this one had behaved so aggressively. Mark's story became a warning, told by lifeguards and surfers to remind people of the dangers hidden in the ocean. The calm, beautiful waves held secrets, deadly predators lurking just beneath the surface. The spot where Mark died remained empty for a long time. Boats rarely anchored there, and swimmers avoided the area, afraid to disturb what they couldn't see below. Emily never remarried. She kept Mark's photos, remembering the good times they shared. She spent hours sitting by the shore, staring silently at the water, trying to find peace. Months turned into years, but the pain never fully disappeared. Emily stayed away from the Bahamas, unable to face the place where her happiness had ended so suddenly. The ocean remained unchanged. Waves continued rolling onto shore, hiding the truth of what happened beneath the surface. But those who knew Mark's story never forgot. They were reminded forever that the ocean's beauty could sometimes hide great danger beneath its waves. In June 2003, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina's pristine shores, welcomed countless tourists seeking sun and relaxation. Among them were Lena Porter and Daniel Hayes, two graduate students from a university who had connected through mutual friends. The barrier island, known for its 12 miles of immaculate beaches and generally safe swimming conditions, rarely saw dangerous marine life approach its shores. Shark attacks in the area were uncommon, with only 3 minor incidents recorded in the previous decade. Lena, a biochemistry major passionate about marine ecosystems, had suggested the location for their first date. Daniel, studying architectural engineering, had eagerly agreed, impressed by her outdoor enthusiasm. They had spent weeks exchanging messages online, and both felt nervous about meeting in person for the first time. The morning had gone perfectly. They walked along the shoreline, collecting shells and discussing their families, studies, and aspirations. The conversation flowed easily, confirming what they had both suspected from their online interactions. There was definite chemistry between them. By early afternoon, with the temperature climbing into the high 80s, Lena suggested they cool off with a swim. The beach they had chosen was less crowded than the popular tourist spots. It was a local favorite, a secluded stretch where tall seagrass swayed along the dunes, and the water gradated from clear turquoise to deep blue. Only a few families were scattered along the sand, most staying close to shore or relaxing under colorful umbrellas. Lena and Daniel waded in, laughing as they adjusted to the water temperature. Daniel mentioned that he hadn't been swimming in the ocean since childhood vacations with his parents. More experienced, Lena encouraged him to come out deeper, where they could properly swim. She explained how the tides worked in the area and assured him it was perfectly safe. They swam about 50 yards offshore where the water reached just above their shoulders when standing. The gentle waves lifted them rhythmically as they treaded water and continued their conversation. Daniel was explaining his thesis project when Lena suddenly disappeared beneath the surface with a startled gasp that quickly became a gurgling scream. Daniel thought for a split second that she was playing a joke, until he saw the blood spreading through the water. His mind struggled to process what was happening. Later, he would tell first responders that everything seemed to slow down at that moment. The realization that a shark was attacking Lena, the understanding that he was just feet away from the predator, and the paralyzing fear that froze his limbs. The shark, later identified as a juvenile great white approximately 10 feet long, had struck from below, clamping its jaws around Lena's right thigh. Marine biologists would later speculate that the shark had mistaken her silhouette for that of a seal when viewed from below. Something in Daniel's mind shifted from terror to action. Without conscious thought, he lunged toward Lena, grabbing her under her arms as she briefly resurfaced. Her face was contorted in pain and shock, her mouth open in a silent scream. Daniel kicked wildly, simultaneously trying to pull her toward shore and keep the shark at bay. Through what experts would later call remarkable good fortune, the shark released its grip. This unusual behavior possibly resulted from the shark recognizing that Lena was not its typical prey after the initial bite, a common explanation for why many shark attacks on humans don't proceed to consumption. The water around them clouded red as Daniel struggled to keep Lena's head above water. She was going into shock, her skin pale and clammy despite the warm water. Her wounded leg trailed uselessly behind her as Daniel fought against waves and current to move them shoreward. Their struggle caught the attention of beachgoers. Two men, later identified as off-duty firefighter Winston Abernathy and his brother-in-law, rushed into the water. They helped drag Lena onto the sand while someone else called emergency services. On the beach, Winston applied pressure to Lena's wound using beach towels, while his wife, a registered nurse, monitored her vital signs and kept her conscious by asking questions about her name and the date. Daniel, in shock himself, could only watch helplessly as strangers worked to save his date's life. The shark's teeth had torn through skin, fat, and muscle, but miraculously missed the femoral artery. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, stabilized Lena, and transported her to Hilton Head Hospital, where a surgical team was already preparing for her arrival. Lena underwent 7 hours of surgery to repair the damage to her leg. The medical team, led by Dr. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, a specialist in trauma surgery, used over 300 stitches to close the wounds. Lena would later report that Dr. Fitzpatrick had told her she was lucky. The bite pattern suggested the shark had initially gripped her with its front teeth rather than performing a full bite, which would likely have severed her leg completely. Recovery was arduous. Lena spent 3 weeks in the hospital fighting infection and beginning physical therapy. Daniel visited daily, bringing books and takeout food from local restaurants. Their unusual first date became a tentative romance forged in trauma and recovery. 6 months later, Lena walked with only a slight limp. 1 year after the attack, she successfully defended her master's thesis on marine conservation, including a chapter on shark behavior and attack prevention. She became an advocate for shark protection, often emphasizing that her attack was exceedingly rare and resulted from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Daniel and Lena dated for 3 years before marrying in 2006. They settled in Charleston, where Lena worked for a marine conservation nonprofit, and Daniel designed eco-friendly coastal homes. They often joked that theirs was the most memorable first date story at dinner parties, though neither of them ever swam in open ocean water again, preferring pools and very shallow beach wading. The shark that attacked Lena was never seen again in the area. Local tourism suffered briefly following media coverage of the incident, but recovered by the following season. The attack became part of local lore, occasionally referenced by tour guides as they emphasized the statistical rarity of such events, a point that Lena made whenever interviewed about her experience. In August 2012, the rugged coastline of Big Sur, California, lived up to its reputation for dramatic natural encounters. This stretch of Central California coastline, where the Santa Lucia Mountains rise abruptly from the Pacific Ocean, had long attracted surfers seeking challenging waves away from crowded beaches. The remote location, with limited cell service and difficult access points, added an element of adventure and risk that drew experienced surfers like Chris Vega. The area had recorded only 2 minor shark encounters in the previous decade, neither resulting in injuries. Marine biologists attributed this relative safety to the deep underwater canyons offshore, which provided natural feeding grounds for great white sharks and kept them typically distant from human recreational areas. However, August marked the beginning of elephant seal pupping season in nearby colonies, occasionally drawing sharks closer to shore. Chris, a 34-year-old architectural photographer from San Luis Obispo, had been surfing Big Sur's challenging breaks for over a decade. With his distinctive shock of prematurely silver hair and weathered tan, Chris was a familiar figure to the small community of local surfers. His weekend ritual involved driving his faded blue Jeep Cherokee up Highway 1 at dawn, parking at one of several unmarked pullouts, and hiking down precarious paths to access isolated coves. On this particular Sunday morning, Chris arrived at a spot locals called Ghost Tree for the bleached driftwood visible at low tide. The conditions seemed perfect, 4 to 6 foot swells rolling in consistently, offshore winds creating clean faces, and unusually warm water for the notoriously chilly Pacific. Only 2 other surfers were visible in the distance, a married couple Chris knew casually from previous outings. After paddling out beyond the break line, Chris spent an hour riding waves successfully. The couple eventually headed in, mentioning plans to drive north to Carmel for lunch. Chris decided to stay for just one more wave, a decision that would change his life. He later told researchers that he remembered thinking how unusually alone he felt once the other surfers disappeared from view. As Chris paddled toward an approaching swell, the first indication of danger came when his yellow 9-foot longboard suddenly lifted from beneath, as though balanced momentarily on something solid in the water. Experienced surfers recognize that such displacement typically has only one explanation in deep water: a large marine animal moving directly beneath the board. Before Chris could process this realization, the water exploded around him. A great white shark, later estimated to be 14 feet long based on bite radius measurements, breached partially from below, its jaws clamping onto the rear third of his surfboard. The impact threw Chris forward, his chest slamming against the board's surface before he tumbled into the water. Marine biologist Dr. Valencia Nguyen, who later documented the incident for the California Shark Research Commission, described the attack as a classic investigatory bite. Great whites often sample unfamiliar objects at the surface, particularly those resembling their natural prey's silhouette when viewed from below. With his legs dangling, Chris's longboard presented a seal-like profile, the preferred prey of adult great whites. Contrary to the movie's depictions of continuous attacks, the shark released the board almost immediately after detecting that it was not a seal. This brief moment allowed Chris to scramble back onto what remained of his board, the rear section now completely missing, with jagged bite marks creating a crescent-shaped void where his feet had been moments earlier. As Chris clung to the damaged board, his surfing experience triggered a critical observation. A second triangular dorsal fin cut through the surface approximately 20 yards away. In his subsequent account to the Museum of Natural History's Shark Encounter Registry, Chris described the horrible realization that he was positioned between 2 great white sharks, possibly a hunting pair, a rare but documented behavior. The second shark, slightly smaller at approximately 12 feet, began swimming in a circular pattern that gradually tightened around Chris's position. Shark researchers note this behavior as a predatory assessment pattern, commonly seen before an attack. Chris remained as motionless as possible, understanding that additional splashing might trigger a predatory response. After what Chris later described as the longest 3 minutes of my life, the first shark returned, approaching directly toward his crippled board. Rather than attacking, it bumped the underside of the board with its snout, a behavior scientists call test bumping, where sharks use sensitive receptors in their snouts to gather information about potential prey. The impact spun Chris and his damaged board in a slow circle. He gripped the edges desperately, fighting against gravity. The smooth fiberglass surface was now slick with seawater and his cold sweat. Each rotation brought him face to face with one shark, and then the other, their dark eyes seeming to evaluate him with what he later described as ancient intelligence. In what marine biologists consider consistent with great white behavior patterns but miraculous from Chris's perspective, both sharks suddenly departed. Their dorsal fins sliced through the surface, heading toward deeper water, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. This behavior aligns with research suggesting great whites often lose interest after determining an object is not their preferred prey. As the sharks retreated, a larger set of waves approached. Chris, still clinging to his mangled board, seized the opportunity. He caught the largest wave, a difficult feat on his damaged equipment, and rode it straight toward shore without attempting to stand. The board's compromised buoyancy made the journey treacherous, but adrenaline and survival instinct propelled him forward. Chris collapsed on the narrow strip of sand, dragging his board beside him. The bite mark measured 32 inches across, approximately the size of a car tire as he would later describe it. The fiberglass was sheared cleanly through, and the polyurethane core was exposed like the cross-section of a honeycomb. After recovering from the immediate shock, Chris faced the daunting task of climbing the steep trail back to his vehicle with his damaged board. He later told a local newspaper that carrying the physical evidence felt crucial. Without it, he feared no one would simultaneously believe his encounter with two great whites. The incident transformed Chris's relationship with the ocean. Unlike many shark encounter survivors who never returned to the water, Chris resumed surfing 6 months later, significantly modifying his habits. He joined a community of surfers who use electronic shark deterrent devices. He never surfed alone again and avoided dawn and dusk sessions when sharks typically feed. The boat rocked gently on the turquoise waves of the Bahamas. The tourists dressed in sleek wetsuits listened closely as their guide ran through the final safety briefing. Excitement buzzed through the group as they prepared to descend into the depths, eager for the once-in-a-lifetime experience of diving alongside the legendary tiger sharks that ruled these waters. 40-year-old Tim adjusted his mask, his fingers trembling slightly as he secured the strap. He had always been fascinated by sharks but had never been this close to them before. The brochures had promised a controlled encounter, a thrilling but safe dive led by experts who understood the behavior of these massive predators. The guide, a seasoned diver with years of experience, assured them once more that tiger sharks were generally docile and curious but not aggressive. But was he telling the truth? One by one they entered the water, the sensation shocking against their skin as they descended toward the ocean floor. Sunlight pierced through the surface and illuminated the vast, open expanse of blue. The dive site had been carefully chosen, a sandy bottom with scattered coral formations, an area known for its frequent tiger shark visits. At first, everything was calm. Schools of fish drifted lazily around them, and the rhythmic sound of bubbles filled the silence. Then, as if summoned by their presence, a shadow materialized from the deep. The tiger shark was enormous, at least 14 feet long, its striped body gliding effortlessly through the water. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, weaving between the divers, its dark eyes scanning them with quiet curiosity. The group remained still just as instructed, their breaths controlled, their movements minimal. The guide maintained eye contact with the shark, his body language calm and confident. For several minutes, the shark circled, assessing the strange intruders in its domain. The tension in the water was palpable, somewhere between awe and an unspoken awareness of the predator's power. Then, something shifted. Tim, unable to suppress the growing unease clawing at his gut, made a mistake. His breathing quickened, his muscles tensed, and without thinking, he shifted abruptly, his body jerking slightly backward. To the shark, the sudden movement was like a signal, a break in the quiet rhythm of the dive. In an instant, its curiosity turned to something else. It was no longer only a beautiful animal, it was a killer. The massive head tilted, the black eyes locking onto Tim, and then in a terrifying burst of speed, it lunged. Tim didn't have time to react. A crushing pressure clamped down on his shoulder, the force of the bite sending a shockwave of pain through his body. He felt the sharp, serrated teeth pierce through the wetsuit, slicing into flesh and muscle. Blood clouded the water in an instant. Dark and ominous, panic erupted. The guide moved fast, gripping a metal pole and thrusting it between the shark's jaws, prying it away from Tim. The shark recoiled, its body twisting as it retreated, but it didn't leave. It circled again, faster now, its movements no longer passive. The scent of blood had ignited its instincts. Tim struggled to stay upright, his vision blurring as pain pulsed through his shoulder. The water around him was thick with red, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His wetsuit was shredded, the fabric hanging in tatters where the shark's teeth had torn through. His body screamed for air, but the moment demanded stillness. Control. Any more sudden movements could draw the shark right back to him. The other divers, caught in the chaos, tried to remain motionless, but fear had already begun unraveling their discipline. One of them flinched as the shark brushed past, the heavy body knocking him off balance. Another gasped into her regulator as the predator looped around, its massive tail sweeping dangerously close. The guide was already signaling to the group, urging them upward. They needed to surface. Now. With careful, measured movements, they began their ascent, but the shark wasn't done. It shadowed them, its presence an unrelenting threat beneath their fins. It moved closer again, brushing against one of the divers, testing, waiting. The boat was visible above, but the distance felt endless. The open water suddenly something akin to a death sentence. The guide stayed at the rear, his eyes locked onto the predator, using the pole to create distance whenever it ventured too close. Every second stretched unbearably long, every kick upward felt agonizingly slow. The surface shimmered above them, but the threat below was still too close. Tim's arm felt useless, his strength draining with every drop of blood that dispersed into the sea. His mind swam with dizziness, but he forced himself to keep moving, to follow the others toward the safety of the boat. His lungs burned, his thoughts blurred, but survival pushed him forward. The moment their heads broke the surface, chaos exploded anew. The crew on the boat was already in motion, hauling them aboard one by one. Tim barely registered the hands gripping him, pulling him out of the water. The cold air hit his face as he collapsed onto the deck, his wetsuit slick with blood. Someone pressed a towel against his shoulder, the pressure sending fresh waves of pain through him. The rest of the group scrambled aboard, their breaths ragged, their bodies shaking. The shark remained below, its shadow visible just beneath the waves, still circling and watching. But the dive was over. The ocean had given them a warning, a reminder of its raw, untamed power. The boat's engine roared to life, cutting through the water as they sped toward the shore. Tim's body felt heavy, his mind slipping in and out of focus, but he could hear the frantic voices around him, the rush of movement as someone wrapped his arm in bandages, trying to slow the bleeding. By the time they reached the dock, an ambulance was waiting. Medics moved swiftly, lifting him onto a stretcher, assessing his injuries. The bite was severe, the wound deep, but he was alive. As the ambulance doors closed, Tim stared up at the sky, his breath shallow but steady. The ocean had taken its toll, had left its mark, but he had survived. He knew he would never see it the same way again. Jessica had always been the adventurous one in her group of friends. At 34 years old, she had built a life around exploration, taking every opportunity to experience the unknown. On this trip to Queensland, she was with 3 of her closest friends, Emily, Rachel, and Ben, out on a small boat, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the clear, inviting waters. They were excited for a relaxing day on the ocean, far from the worries of everyday life. The boat gently rocked on the waves, and the world felt calm like it always did on the water. Jessica had always been fascinated by the ocean and its creatures, particularly sharks. She wasn't afraid of them like most people. To her, they were majestic, misunderstood, and awe-inspiring. Today, though, she wasn't anticipating anything beyond a peaceful day. The water was still, the sky was blue, and the salt air felt refreshing. After a while, they began tossing scraps from their lunch into the water, watching the ripples spread outward. A school of fish quickly gathered below, darting in and out of view. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a harmless spectacle, but as the fish swarmed around, something far larger approached from beneath. Jessica was the first to spot it, her eyes narrowing as a shadow passed below them. A large, sleek fin cut through the water. Unmistakable. Excitement surged as she leaned over the boat's edge, her heart pounding with adrenaline. The others saw it too, and they leaned forward, captivated by the sight of the shark gliding toward them. Its silhouette was large and powerful, the muscular body of a bull shark moving with grace. Jessica, already thrilled, felt a deeper pull as she gazed at it. She had always wanted to get closer to a shark, to feel the sensation of touching one. She wanted to experience something few people ever did. Ben marveled at the size of the shark, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and caution. But Jessica was already too far gone. She reached her hand down over the side of the boat, her fingers poised above the water, trembling with both excitement and nervousness. Her friends watched in disbelief, but Jessica was determined. She understood that sharks could be curious creatures, sometimes even allowing people to touch them. Maybe today, she thought, would be the day she would get that once-in-a-lifetime experience. Without hesitation, she lowered her hand further, her fingers skimming the water's surface. The shark was getting closer, the shape of its body growing clearer beneath the glassy surface. Its eyes glimmered coldly in the water, and for a brief moment, Jessica thought she saw a flash of recognition, as though the shark knew she was there. Everything happened in an instant. The shark whipped around with a speed that defied its size. Its massive, powerful body lunged upward in a blur of motion. Jessica didn't have time to react. Its jaws opened wide, the rows of teeth glistening in the sunlight. She felt its skin's cold, rough texture against her fingertips for just a fraction of a second before the shark's jaws clamped down around her hand. The pain was immediate and blinding. It shot up her arm. Jessica screamed, her body jerking back instinctively, but the shark's grip was like iron, its teeth digging deep into her flesh. The world seemed to go quiet, the boat rocking violently as her friends screamed in panic, their voices drowned out by her heart pounding in her ears. Jessica's eyes widened in shock, the blood rushing to her head as she felt the weight of the shark's bite, its teeth like sharp daggers tearing into her hand. She tried to pull away, her body flailing desperately, but the shark's grip only tightened, trying to drag her down into the water. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, the crushing pressure of its bite forcing her to struggle harder, to break free. Her friends were shouting, reaching for her, but Jessica couldn't focus on anything but the pain. She felt her fingers being severed one by one, the shark's teeth slicing through her flesh with ease. Her heart raced as the shark shook its head violently, its powerful muscles tearing her hand from her arm in unison. The water around her was turning red, the blood pouring out of her hand and swirling around her. Jessica's vision blurred, but the pain remained sharp and real, each wave cutting through her mind like a knife. Her body went numb from shock, and for a moment she thought she might lose consciousness. Then, just as quickly as it had struck, the shark released its grip and disappeared into the depths of the water, vanishing as if it had never been there. Jessica collapsed on the boat's deck, exhausted. The only sound she could hear was the frantic words of her friends. Ben was the first to grab her, his hands shaking as he hauled her into a sitting position, his eyes wide with horror. He shook her with all his strength, trying to get her awake. Her body slumped against him as he tried to stop the bleeding. Emily and Rachel scrambled to help, their panic palpable as they searched for towels, pressing them against Jessica's mangled hand. Jessica's breath was ragged and shallow. The blood was pouring freely from her hand, and though her mind screamed for help, her body felt as though it were fading, the world around her growing dim. She forced herself to stay conscious, to hold on. She had to stay alive. With trembling hands, Ben grabbed the radio, calling for immediate help. Time seemed to stretch forever as they rushed toward the shore, Jessica's body weakly swaying with the boat's motion. The others worked frantically, trying to keep pressure on the wound, trying to stem the bleeding, but nothing seemed enough. Finally, the shore came into view after what felt like an eternity. Help arrived in a blur of motion, paramedics, stretchers, and flashing lights, and they quickly took over, working swiftly to stabilize her. Jessica was loaded into an ambulance, her body barely responsive, her mind slipping in and out of consciousness. They said she was lucky. It could have been worse. The fingers were gone, but her life was saved. In the end, Jessica knew she would never forget the shark, the pain, the rush of terror. But most of all, she would remember how close she had come to losing everything, and how it only took a single moment for her life to change forever. The ocean of New Zealand stretched endlessly before them, rolling waves rising and falling beneath the golden afternoon sun. Maya and Ethan paddled further from shore, the rhythmic sound of their hands slicing through the water blending with the distant cries of seagulls. The waves had been strong that day, each set carrying an irresistible promise of adrenaline. Maya, always the more daring of the two, had led them farther than usual, her excitement outweighing any hesitation. Ethan followed, trusting her instincts but feeling a quiet unease settle in his chest as the shoreline shrank behind them. Then, without warning, the water beneath him shifted violently. A shadow, massive and impossibly fast, surged beneath the surface. Before Ethan could react, something struck his board with bone-rattling force, sending him tumbling into the sea. The water rushed in as he fought to orient himself, his vision blurred by the swirling salt water. He surfaced, gasping for breath, his arms flailing as his board drifted out of reach. Panic gripped his chest as he turned, scanning the water for Maya. She was still on her board, eyes wide, body frozen. And then he saw it. The great white shark cut through the water like a living torpedo, its dorsal fin slicing the surface as it circled back. The sheer size of it sent a jolt of terror through Ethan's veins. It wasn't just a shark, it was a predator, ancient and relentless, and it was coming for them. Ethan's breath came in short, panicked bursts as he kicked frantically toward the shore, heart hammering, instinct screaming at him to escape. Every stroke through the water felt painfully slow, his body heavy with exhaustion and fear. Behind him, Maya moved, but not toward safety. She was heading straight for the shark. Realization struck Ethan like a wave crashing down. She was trying to distract it, to draw it away from him. His stomach twisted in horror as she slapped the surface of the water, her board rocking beneath her. The shark turned, its massive body angling toward her. Maya's muscles burned as she paddled, her breath sharp and shallow, every instinct in her body screaming at her to flee. But she forced herself to stay, to keep the shark's attention locked on her. She knew what she was doing. She had read about attacks and had seen the statistics. Sharks rarely targeted humans deliberately, but this wasn't an accident. It had already struck once, it was aggressive, and Ethan was vulnerable in the open water. The shark closed in, its body a monstrous shadow just beneath the surface. Then it struck. The shark lunged from below, its powerful jaws clamping onto her leg with crushing force. A sharp, searing pain shot through her as teeth sliced through flesh, bone grinding beneath the pressure. The world spun as she was yanked violently from her board and dragged beneath the surface in an instant. Ethan's scream was swallowed by the ocean. Maya fought with everything she had, her body thrashing as she kicked and struck at the beast. The water around her darkened with blood, a cloud of crimson billowing outward as the shark shook her like a rag doll. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, and her body screamed for air as she clawed desperately at the water, at the shark, at anything to break free. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, the shark released her. She shot to the surface, gasping, her body weak, her limbs trembling. Ethan was there, his arms wrapping around her, his frantic strokes pulling them toward shore. But Maya could feel it. Something was wrong. The water beneath her felt heavy, the warmth spreading down her legs sickeningly unnatural. Ethan's breath came in desperate, panicked bursts as he fought against the tide, dragging her with him. The shore was too far, the waves felt too strong, and the blood in the water, it would only bring the shark back. He knew it. Maya's head lolled against his shoulder. Her breaths were shallow and uneven. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Her body was going limp in his arms. Ethan couldn't believe what was happening to his girlfriend. He kicked harder, his muscles screaming, and his lungs burning. The shoreline was there, so close, but it might as well have been miles away. The shark didn't return. It had vanished into the depths, its hunger momentarily satisfied, but the damage had been done. By the time Ethan reached the shallows, staggering onto the wet sand with Maya in his arms, he knew. He collapsed to his knees, his hands pressed against the gaping wound on her leg, but the blood wouldn't stop. It soaked into the sand, mingling with the surf that rushed around them. Maya's eyes fluttered, her grip on his arm weak, slipping, and then she was still. The waves crashed against the shore, unrelenting, indifferent. The ocean that had given them so much, the thrill, the beauty, the freedom, had taken everything in a single, merciless moment. Ethan sat there, holding her, his body trembling, his heart pounding in his ears. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, a cruel contrast to the darkness settling in his chest. She had saved him. And now, she was gone. Ethan would love her and honor her bravery for the rest of his life. The ocean stretched endlessly around Zoe, a deep blue expanse shimmering under the Australian sun. The wind carried the scent of salt and fish, the gentle rocking of her boat barely noticeable. Zoe had built her career on moments like this, alone with her rod, the camera rolling, and her audience watching in real time. She adjusted her cap and checked the chat streaming on her phone, mounted securely beside her. Thousands were watching, waiting and anticipating her next big catch. The waters were rich with life, and today she was after something impressive. She had teased her audience about the strong pull she had felt earlier, hinting at a trophy fish. What she hadn't told them was that she was fishing in waters known for bull sharks. Zoe had been on the water her whole life, comfortable in its unpredictability. She knew the risks, but she never felt fear, just respect. She believed that as long as she stayed in the boat, controlled the fight, and didn't get careless, she was in no real danger. A sudden, violent tug on her line nearly wrenched the rod from her hands. Her muscles strained as she braced herself, her pulse quickening with excitement. The chat exploded with messages, her viewers urging her on, guessing what she had hooked. The rod bent sharply, the drag screaming as the unseen force below pulled hard. She widened her stance, struggling to keep control. Whatever she had on the line was powerful, thrashing just beneath the surface, but she was determined to bring it in. Then, without warning, the water erupted. A massive shape surged from below, a blur of dark gray and white as it exploded from the sea, its head breaching the surface. The shark slammed against the boat's edge with a force that sent vibrations through the hull. Before Zoe could react, the impact knocked her off balance. Her footing slipped, the world tilted, and in an instant, she was in the water. The moment her body hit the surface, cold panic crashed over her. The chat that had been buzzing with excitement turned into a flood of horrified messages as her camera, still streaming, captured her flailing arms and her desperate struggle to keep afloat. The current pulled at her as her heart pounded in her chest, the salt water stinging her eyes. She gasped for air, her limbs fighting against the weight of the ocean. And then she saw the shark turning. The bull shark, nearly 9 feet long, was moving with precision, drawn back by the chaos, the disturbance, and the unmistakable vibrations of a struggling body in the water. Zoe kicked hard, trying to propel herself away from the animal, toward anything that could give her an edge, but she knew it was futile. The shark closed the distance with shocking speed, its powerful body cutting through the water. When it struck, Zoe could swear this was what a car crash felt like. The force knocked the air from her lungs, a crushing weight slamming into her side as teeth carved deep into her flesh. The pain was instant and blinding, her body twisting violently as she was yanked downward. She barely had time to process what was happening before she was beneath the surface, the water around her turning red. She kicked, punched, fought, every survival instinct firing at once. But the shark was relentless. It shook its head, tearing flesh from bone, dragging her deeper. The pressure in her chest built as her oxygen drained and her movements were frantic but weakening. Her mind screamed at her to fight, to keep going, but the shark's grip was too strong, its power unmatched. The water around her churned with red clouds of blood as the beast released her for a brief second, repositioning for another strike. Zoe tried to push toward the light above, her vision blurring, her strength fading, but she wasn't fast enough. The shark surged forward again, its jaws clamping down with devastating force. Above, the stream continued. Viewers watched in frozen horror. The once exciting broadcast transformed into something nightmarish. Some screamed at their screens, pleading for someone to do something. Others frantically tried to contact the Coast Guard, but no one could reach her in time. On a nearby boat, another streamer who had been fishing close by was already moving. He had seen Zoe go over, had seen the shark strike, and without thinking, he gunned his engine, racing toward the scene. As he approached, the water's surface was still rippling violently, dark streaks spreading out like ink in the sea. He threw a life preserver into the water, searching desperately for movement. But Zoe wasn't there. Only the endless waves, rolling gently under the midday sun, gave any sign of the violence that had just taken place beneath them. Minutes stretched into an eternity before emergency responders arrived. Boats combed the area, divers plunged beneath the surface, but deep down they knew the truth. Zoe was gone. Her body was recovered later, carried miles from where she had vanished. The shark had done what sharks do, responding to the instincts that had ruled them for millions of years. There was no malice in its attack, no intention beyond the response to an opportunity. But that truth did little to ease the horror of what had happened. The news became viral, turning what had been a routine live stream into a global headline. Footage of her final moments circulated online, dissected, analyzed, and debated. Some called it a tragic accident, an unavoidable risk of the ocean. Others blamed her, saying she had been reckless, that she had knowingly placed herself in dangerous waters for the sake of views. The conversation grew heated. Experts weighed in on the growing trend of live-streamed extreme sports and outdoor adventures, questioning whether real-time content had made people careless in their pursuit of spectacle. Viewers who had once cheered her on now argued over who was responsible, whether the charter companies should be held accountable, or whether more precautions should have been taken. But none of it changed the fact that Zoe was gone. Her channel, once a hub of adventure and excitement, became a memorial. Fans left messages of grief, clips of their favorite moments, and memories of the woman who had brought them along on every journey, who had shared her passion with the world. The ocean had been her second home, her greatest love, and in the end, it had taken her. For days, the water where she had vanished remained eerily quiet. Fewer boats, fewer tourists, as if the ocean itself had swallowed the memory of what had happened. But the sharks still swam beneath the waves, moving through the currents as they always had, unchanged, untouched by the tragedy that had unfolded in their realm. The Caribbean water was a deep, mesmerizing blue, the sun casting sharp beams through the surface, lighting up the coral below. Sarah, Emily, and Hannah, experienced divers and renowned wildlife filmmakers, were excited as they descended into the water, each with a camera in hand. They were on a mission to capture rare footage of oceanic whitetip sharks, known for their unpredictable behavior, but also their incredible beauty. With years of experience under their belts, the three women were prepared for whatever the ocean would throw at them. Sarah, the leader of the group, was calm and steady. Born in Hawaii, she had spent most of her life underwater, her passion for sharks shaping her career. Emily was the technical expert, constantly adjusting her equipment to get the perfect shot. Hannah, the youngest, was the most eager of the three, always the first to volunteer for a dive. Together, they made a powerful team. They had filmed countless documentaries in dangerous waters, but today was different. Today, they were about to get closer to the apex predator of the open ocean than they had ever dared before. They dove further away from the boat, the ocean opening up around them. The water felt cool and refreshing, a welcome relief from the heat of the sun above. As they swam deeper, they marveled at the silence and the life surrounding them. Small fish darted past, and the coral reef below was teeming with color. They moved in synchronized harmony, their cameras capturing every moment. But the sharks, elusive as always, were nowhere to be seen. Minutes passed. Then, from the corner of her eye, Sarah saw the fin. It was unmistakable. The shark was large, its body long and sleek, cutting through the water with quiet power. An oceanic whitetip, a species known for its curiosity and sometimes erratic behavior, was circling them. At first it seemed indifferent, gliding silently at a distance, almost invisible in the deep blue. But then it moved closer. Emily's camera caught its movement, but Sarah's instincts flared first. She waved her arm, signaling the others to stay calm, but her pulse quickened. The shark was studying them. Sarah wasn't sure they could survive if the shark decided to attack, and then it did just that. The shark's movements were sudden and brutal. In one swift motion, it lunged toward Sarah, its massive jaws snapping. The shark's teeth sank deep into her arm. The pain was immediate, white-hot, and blinding. Sarah gasped, the force of the bite pulling her toward the depths. The shark shook its head, twisting and tearing at her flesh. Emily screamed, though it was muffled by the water, and instinctively swam closer to help. But in her panic, she was careless. The shark turned sharply toward her, and its teeth grazed her side, just below her ribs. She gasped, the shock of the wound more from the closeness of the predator than the pain. Hannah, who had been closest to Sarah, turned just in time to see the shark veer toward her. The massive body struck her legs, knocking her sideways. She cried out in pain, feeling the brutal force of the shark's weight and the rush of water as it swept her away. The trio struggled to react, every movement feeling like slow motion. Blood mixed with the seawater around them, the scent of it sharp in the open ocean. The shark, its attack over for the moment, circled them again, its sleek body moving with terrifying speed. It was now a hunt. Sarah, her arm dripping with blood, managed to stop her descent. She focused, trying to stay calm, but every fiber of her being screamed for the surface. Emily, holding her side where the shark had grazed her, managed to reach out and grab Hannah's arm, pulling her towards the boat. But the shark was fast, moving in tight circles around them, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Hannah's leg was bleeding heavily, the gash from the shark's strike deep enough to be dangerous. She gritted her teeth, her legs aching, but the adrenaline pumping through her kept her moving. They needed to get to the surface. They needed to get to the boat. The water seemed endless, each stroke taking more effort than the last. The shark didn't relent. It circled them, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Sarah's heart raced. She had been in dangerous situations before, but never like this. Never with the unmistakable feeling that they were being trapped. Minutes felt like hours. They fought to keep their heads above water, knowing they had to get back to the boat before the shark made its move. The boat captain, who had been watching from a distance, had already seen the chaos unfold. He gunned the engine, heading straight for them, but they were still too far away. The shark was closing in. Finally, the boat appeared, just in time. The captain threw a rope into the water and the women reached for it desperately. Emily was the first to grab it, pulling herself toward the side of the boat with all her strength. Sarah, bloodied and exhausted, followed. Her arm nearly useless, but her will strong. Hannah, her leg throbbing with pain, was next. They scrambled to the boat, the shark still circling beneath them, the water bubbling with its presence. Once on board, the crew immediately went into action, pulling the women aboard and making sure they were stable. The captain radioed for help. The Coast Guard alerted, but the threat had passed. The shark was gone. The women were shaken, but they had survived. Their cameras, still running, had caught the entire ordeal. The footage was raw, unfiltered, a testament to the unpredictability of the creatures they had sought to film. The days following the incident were filled with pain and reflection. Sarah's arm was bandaged, Emily's side was healing, and Hannah's leg required stitches. They had each been lucky, but luck was not something they took for granted. The attack had raised questions about the behavior of oceanic whitetips, their tendency to become aggressive in certain situations, and how little was truly understood about their predatory instincts. In the end, the women were left with a deep respect for the power of the ocean and the creatures that called it home. They had gone into the water to document the majesty of the sharks but they had emerged with a new understanding of the risks and a humbling reminder that, sometimes, the ocean was in control. On March 1, 2025, the waters off the coast of Australia shimmered under the afternoon sun. The waves rolled gently, the vast expanse of the coral sea stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A luxurious private yacht, sleek and modern, glided smoothly across the blue waters. Aboard the yacht were 5 tourists, each eager to experience the beauty of the ocean. Michael Carter, 38, a seasoned traveler from California, had always dreamed of sailing across Australian waters. His wife, Jessica Carter, 35, a marine biology teacher, was fascinated by the diverse life beneath the waves. Their close friend, Daniel Reed, 40, an adventure enthusiast from New York, had convinced them to join this exclusive tour. Rounding out the group were Ana Vasquez, 32, a travel blogger from Spain, and James Holt, 28, a British diving instructor who had planned to snorkel in one of the world's most breathtaking locations. The trip had been perfect. The yacht's captain had guided them along the Great Barrier Reef, pointing out the rich coral formations and vibrant marine life. The air was warm and the ocean was calm. It seemed like paradise. As the yacht moved farther from shore, the crew served drinks while the tourists enjoyed the view from the deck. The atmosphere was relaxed, filled with laughter and scent of salt in the breeze. Then, without warning, everything changed. A rogue wave appeared on the horizon, building rapidly. Within seconds, the peaceful sea turned chaotic. The yacht lurched violently, the impact sending shockwaves through the deck. Glasses shattered, and plates slid across the table. The 5 tourists lost their balance. As the yacht rocked dangerously, they tumbled overboard, plunging into the water. For a moment, the world went silent beneath the waves. The warm ocean surrounded them, their bodies suspended in the deep blue. Then the surface broke with splashes, gasps for air filling the space where the yacht had been only seconds before. They had fallen into open waters. Panic set in. They called out to the crew, but the yacht had drifted several meters away, its engine humming as the crew scrambled to regain control. Then, the real horror began. A shadow moved beneath them. Jessica, who had studied sharks, knew exactly what she was seeing. This was a feeding ground. The first fin sliced through the surface, circling slowly. Then another. Great white sharks had arrived, drawn by the movement in the water. The group kicked frantically, trying to stay afloat and not to attract attention. But it was too late. A massive 16-foot great white shark surged upward, its jaws opening wide. The powerful creature struck Michael first, dragging him beneath the waves. A cloud of red erupted around him before he vanished, the water swallowing him whole. Jessica screamed, but there was no time to react. Another shark lunged forward, clamping onto Daniel's leg. He barely had time to gasp before being pulled under, his body disappearing into the depths. The remaining 3 tried to swim back toward the yacht, but the sharks were faster. The terror was not over yet. The ocean churned. The yacht floated nearby, its crew scrambling to react, but the water between the vessel and the tourists was alive with movement. The great white sharks circled, their dark shadows cutting through the waves. Jessica, Anna, and James were the only ones left. Their arms ached as they tried to swim, but the weight of the ocean dragged at their limbs. The waves pushed them apart, breaking their frantic strokes as the sharks closed in. Anna barely had time to turn before a shark struck. Its massive jaws clamped around her waist, pulling her under with terrifying force. The surface bubbled red for a moment before going still. Jessica and James kept swimming, their minds blinded by terror. The yacht was still too far. The next attack came fast. A great white rushed from below, its body crashing into James. His scream never made it past his lips as the creature's teeth clamped down, jerking him beneath the surface in a violent thrash. A moment later, only his red-stained life vest remained, bobbing in the waves. Jessica was alone. The sharks kept circling, drawn by the blood clouding the water. She could not stop. The yacht was her only chance. Her lungs burned, her heart hammered, but she kept pushing forward. The weight of fear and exhaustion pulled at her body, but she refused to slow down. The crew threw a life ring, their faces pale with shock. Jessica lunged for it, gripping the rope with all her strength as they hauled her aboard. Her arms gave out, her body collapsing onto the deck. The air felt too heavy, the world too bright. She was covered with the blood of her friends, the salty water staining her skin and clothes. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she lay motionless, her body shaking from shock. Below, the sharks circled the empty water. The ocean held no trace of the others. The rescue call had already gone out. When authorities arrived, they searched the waters, but there was nothing left to recover. The only signs of the attack were the stained waves and the clawed remains of a torn life jacket floating near the wreck site. Jessica could not speak. Her mind replayed everything, over and over, the wave, the plunge, and the shadows beneath the water. News of the attack spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the local community. Officials reviewed the reports, confirming that the yacht had been sailing near a well-known feeding ground for great white sharks. Experts debated whether the attack had been a freak accident or if the splashing of the tourists had triggered a natural hunting response. Despite the explanations, Jessica knew the truth. The ocean had taken 4 lives that day, and she had barely escaped. For months, she struggled with survivor's guilt, the memories haunting her every time she closed her eyes. The Australian coast remained unchanged, the waves lapping against the shore as if nothing had happened. But for Jessica, the water would never feel safe again. On June 17, 2024, the Pacific Ocean shimmered under the bright California sun. The waters off the coast of San Diego stretched wide, calm yet alive with unseen movement beneath the surface. A sleek luxury yacht, packed with music, drinks, and laughter, drifted over the deep blue. Among the guests was Nathan Palmer, 35, a man known for his wild energy and reckless confidence. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Nathan had spent his life chasing excitement. He worked in real estate development, but his true passion was adventure and partying. He had traveled the world, indulging in extreme sports and thrill-seeking experiences. To his friends, he was the guy who never backed down from a dare. That evening, the party was in full swing. Music boomed from the speakers, champagne flowed freely, and guests danced under the open sky. The yacht rocked gently with the waves, its lights casting a golden glow onto the water below. Nathan, already heavily intoxicated, leaned against the railing, his drink swaying in his hand. His friends laughed and chatted around him, oblivious to the dark shape circling the boat below. The first glimpse of the great white shark sent a ripple of excitement through the group. Someone pointed toward the water, drawing attention to the massive predator gliding just beneath the surface. Its gray dorsal fin cut through the waves, its muscular body moving with quiet power. Nathan's eyes lit up with fascination. He had seen sharks before, but never this close, never in the wild. Fueled by alcohol and arrogance, he saw no danger, only a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Ignoring the warnings from a few cautious guests, he stepped closer to the edge, his fingers gripping the polished metal railing. The shark continued circling, its movements slow and deliberate, as if studying the vessel above. Nathan laughed, raising his arm over the side of the boat and extending his hand toward the water as if to pet the deadly creature. The moment was brief. The shark moved with terrifying speed. In an instant, its powerful jaws lunged upward, clamping onto Nathan's arm. The force yanked him over the railing, his body flipping into the sea with a loud splash. Nathan hit the water hard, the cold shock snapping through his drunken haze. The ocean swirled around him, dark and endless. Above, the yacht loomed, its bright lights blurring in the waves. The music had stopped. The laughter had turned to screams. The great white thrashed violently, dragging Nathan deeper as blood clouded the water. His body jerked, his free arm flailing, but the shark's grip was unrelenting. The predator's powerful jaws clamped down, severing muscle and bone in a single brutal motion. On board, chaos unfolded. Guests stumbled back, their faces frozen in horror. Crew members rushed to throw life rings into the sea. Nathan resurfaced for a fleeting moment, his mouth gasping for air. But the shark struck again, its razor-sharp teeth ripping through his torso. The force pulled him under, his body vanishing beneath the foaming waves. The yacht rocked as people scrambled to the edges, their hands gripping the railing, watching helplessly. Seconds passed. Then, from the depths below, the shark resurfaced, its massive body breaking through the surface. In its jaws, what remained of Nathan dangled limply, his torso shredded beyond recognition, his lifeless form barely held together. A final violent shake sent pieces scattering into the sea before the predator vanished into the deep. The ocean grew quiet. The music was gone. The party was over. The crew radioed for emergency assistance, their voices shaking as they reported the attack. The authorities arrived swiftly, scanning the area, but there was nothing left to recover. Only a floating life ring remained, drifting in the waves. The blood had already begun to fade, swallowed by the vastness of the sea. The yacht returned to shore, its passengers in shock. Nathan's friends sat in silence, their faces pale and stunned. No one could believe what they had seen. The official report listed the incident as a fatal shark attack, but those who had witnessed it knew it had been more than that. It had been a reckless decision, a moment of arrogance turned to horror. Nathan had lived for thrills, but this time, the ocean had given him one he could not escape. For weeks, the story dominated headlines, sparking debates about human ignorance and the dangers of marine life. Some blamed alcohol and recklessness. Others saw it as a tragic mistake. But those who had been there could never forget. The waves rolled on, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. But the memory of what had unfolded that night remained, a chilling reminder that in the vastness of the ocean, nature always has the final say. August 14, 2023. The sun shone brightly over the sandy shores of Clearwater Beach, Florida. The sky was clear and blue. The waves were gently rolling onto the soft sand, creating a soothing sound. Families filled the beach. The children built castles and their parents relaxed under colorful umbrellas. It was a perfect day for a peaceful afternoon by the sea. Among the families was Sarah Miller, a 36-year-old elementary school teacher from Tampa, Florida, and her only child, 12-year-old Lily Miller. Sarah had brought Lily to this beach since she was a toddler, creating happy memories filled with laughter and sunshine. Lily was a cheerful girl, known for her bright smile, curiosity about sea creatures, and love for collecting seashells along the shoreline. Sarah sat on a large beach towel, watching Lily wade knee-deep in the shallow waves. Lily's long blonde hair shone under the sunlight, and she laughed as small waves splashed against her legs. Lily loved the ocean. She had posters of dolphins and whales covering her bedroom walls, and her shelves were lined with seashells she had carefully collected over the years. Sarah always joked that Lily must have salt water in her veins. The beach they visited that day was Clearwater Beach, known for its warm waters, white sands, and friendly atmosphere. Families visited frequently because the beach had always been considered safe. Shark sightings were extremely rare, especially attacks. Everyone believed the shallow waters near the shore were safe enough, even for children to play without fear. But today, something changed. Sarah noticed Lily had moved farther away from shore, chasing after a colorful shell bobbing in the gentle surf. Sarah stood up from her chair, shading her eyes against the bright sun, watching carefully. Suddenly she saw it, a shadow beneath the surface. Her stomach tightened. She took a step toward the water, but it was already too late. A massive hammerhead shark surged from the depths, speeding straight toward Lily. Before the young girl even noticed, the shark rammed her with powerful force, knocking her off balance. Lily screamed as the enormous predator's jaws clamped down, its sharp teeth biting deep into her small body. Blood quickly stained the water around her. Sarah's heart froze. She rushed forward, sand kicking up behind her as she ran toward the water. Lifeguards and nearby beachgoers also noticed the attack, sprinting into the waves. But the shark was quicker. With one powerful movement, the hammerhead dragged Lily beneath the waves. The surface churned violently as the water filled with blood. Lily disappeared into the dark depths below. Sarah stopped at the water's edge, her body shaking uncontrollably. The ocean was no longer calm. It was terrifying, filled with panic and grief. People rushed into the waves, desperately searching, their hands reaching into the water. But Lily had vanished. The gentle sea was now a place of horror. The beach quickly filled with cries and panic. Lifeguards blew whistles loudly, signaling people out of the water. Men and women rushed toward the shore, pulling their children away from the waves. The peaceful afternoon was suddenly filled with fear. Sarah stood frozen near the water's edge, staring at the spot where Lily had vanished. Tears ran down her face. Her hands shook and her knees felt weak. Lifeguards dove beneath the waves, desperately searching. Other beachgoers joined, forming a human line in the shallow waters, feeling blindly for any trace of the young girl. Minutes passed slowly, feeling like hours, but there was no sign of Lily. Authorities quickly arrived. Rescue boats and helicopters began scanning the ocean, their loud engines breaking the silence. Spotlights moved across the water, searching for any signs of the girl or the shark that had taken her. As the hours went by, hope faded. No sign of Lily ever surfaced. No clothing, no shell, nothing. Only a faint trace of red in the water remained, soon washed away by waves. As evening fell, rescuers ended their search. Police officers quietly approached Sarah, gently guiding her away from the water. The reality settled over her like a heavy weight. Her child was gone forever. The news spread quickly through Clearwater and nearby towns, leaving the community in shock. People talked quietly about the attack, unable to believe something so horrible had happened in their peaceful place. Shark experts explained on television that hammerheads rarely attacked humans. They believed this shark had simply mistaken Lily for food while chasing other prey. Despite explanations, the beach felt different now. The sand and sea, once filled with laughter, were now places of sadness and caution. Families avoided the shoreline, and fewer swimmers entered the water. Signs went up along Clearwater Beach, warning people about potential shark activity, although everyone knew such an event might never happen again. Sarah's life changed forever after that day. She struggled to sleep, haunted by the memory of watching helplessly as Lily disappeared beneath the waves. She avoided the ocean completely, unable even to hear the sound of waves without feeling sick. Friends and neighbors tried to support her, but nothing eased her pain. Authorities officially declared Lily Carson missing, presumed dead, after several days of searching produced no evidence. The attack was recorded as one of the most tragic and unusual shark incidents on Florida's coast. Months later, a small memorial was built on the beach, a simple wooden cross surrounded by shells Lily would have loved. People visited the memorial regularly, leaving flowers and notes for Sarah, but nothing could truly heal the loss of her daughter. Time passed, but the memory of that day never faded from Clearwater Beach. Lifeguards became more watchful, and swimmers were more careful. Schools began teaching children about ocean safety, hoping to prevent another tragedy. The community had changed, the innocence of their beach forever altered by one horrific event. Sarah eventually moved away from Florida, seeking a place without memories of the ocean that had taken so much from her. Yet, no matter how far she went, the image of that sunny afternoon remained. She never forgot the peaceful moment shattered in an instant, or the daughter she had loved and lost to the sea. The ocean, vast and beautiful, continued as always, seemingly untouched by the sadness it had caused. But for Sarah, and for all those who remembered Lily, the gentle waves of Clearwater Beach held a heartbreaking reminder: a mother's love, a daughter's laughter, and the deep sorrow of a loss that would never be forgotten. On April 1, 2025, the sun gleamed off the turquoise waters of the South African coast as Yekaterina Vasilyeva leaned over the railing of a private boat, adjusting her camera to capture the sight of a great white shark cutting through the waves below. The day had started like any other on her adventure trips, thrilling, full of energy, and most importantly, planned. But adventure, by its very nature, was unpredictable. The group aboard the small vessel had set out from Gansbai, a well-known hotspot for cage diving with sharks. Yekaterina, a 33-year-old travel blogger from St. Petersburg, had been documenting her journey across Africa, sharing the wonders of the wild with her growing audience. The boat rocked slightly as she stepped closer to the edge, angling her shot for the perfect video. A gust of wind swept through and her foot slipped against the damp, slick deck. Instantly, she was over the railing, plunging into the water below. A scream ripped through the air as the group above realized what had happened. Yekaterina surfaced, coughing, flailing to stay afloat. Panic surged through her veins as she registered her situation. No cage, no protection, and in one of the most dangerous shark-filled waters on the planet. Her knee had struck the boat's metal frame on the way down, splitting the skin. Blood seeped into the water, sending a signal no predator could ignore. The first shadow appeared almost immediately, a hulking mass that lurked just below the surface. The shark, nearly 15 feet long, moved with an unsettling grace. It circled once, then again, each rotation pulling it closer. The boat crew scrambled for action. Someone threw out a flotation device. Another reached for the emergency radio. But none of them could stop what came next. Without warning, the great white surged forward, its powerful tail propelling it with terrifying speed. Yekaterina barely had time to react before an unbearable force clamped down on her thigh. Searing pain shot through her body as the shark's serrated teeth tore into flesh, shaking her violently. She screamed, thrashing, trying to pry herself free. The boat crew watched in horror as the water frothed red around her. Desperate, Yekaterina reached for the boat's ladder. Adrenaline fueled her limbs as she kicked with all her strength, trying to pull herself up. The shark, however, had other plans. It lunged again, its teeth sinking deep into her side and left arm. A sickening crunch reverberated through the water as the shark twisted, trying to pull her back under. The force of the attack slammed her against the hull. Her friends on board reacted with frantic determination. Two leaned dangerously over the edge, grabbing at her flailing limbs. A deckhand swung a pole, jabbing it against the shark's snout in a desperate attempt to deter it. After what felt like an eternity, the predator loosened its grip just long enough for the crew to yank Yekaterina onto the deck. She collapsed, her body mangled and bleeding profusely. Her thigh was torn open, muscle and bone visible beneath shredded skin. Deep lacerations crisscrossed her torso, her arm nearly useless from the bites. Yet against all odds, she was alive. The boat's captain wasted no time, radioing for an emergency airlift. Tourniquets were tied hastily around her wounds, and pressure was applied to slow the bleeding. Yekaterina drifted in and out of consciousness as the pain threatened to pull her under again, but she held on. By the time the helicopter arrived, her pulse was weak but present. Rushed to a hospital in Cape Town, she underwent multiple emergency surgeries. Doctors fought to save her leg, and though she faced months of rehabilitation, she survived the ordeal. The attack became a grim reminder of the raw power of the ocean and its apex predators. The incident made international headlines, a chilling testament to nature's unpredictability and the thin line between adventure and disaster. Yekaterina, ever the storyteller, later recounted her brush with death, sharing her experience with the same raw honesty that had made her a beloved figure among travel enthusiasts. And though she would never swim in open water again, her passion for the world remained unshaken. The ocean had left its mark on her body and soul, but it had not taken her spirit. In the weeks following her survival, Yekaterina found herself struggling with the psychological toll of the attack. Nightmares plagued her sleep, each one dragging her back into the cold, churning sea, reliving the moment the shark's jaws clamped onto her flesh. The slightest sound of water lapping against a shore sent an icy dread down her spine. She had escaped with her life, but part of her still felt trapped in that moment, floating helplessly as a predator decided her fate. Her recovery was painstaking. Months of physical therapy became routine, forcing her to relearn how to use her left arm and rebuild the strength in her battered leg. Her doctors were impressed with her resilience, though the scars left behind were unavoidable. The wounds had healed, but each mark on her skin told the story of her encounter. Despite the pain, she refused to let her trauma define her. Instead, she wrote about it extensively, detailing her journey from terror to healing in a blog series that garnered massive attention. Eventually, filmmakers and journalists contacted her, eager to document her harrowing experience. Offers for interviews flooded her inbox, but she was selective, choosing only those who would treat her story with the respect it deserved. A documentary was even in the works, set to recount the attack alongside expert analysis of shark behavior. Yekaterina wanted to ensure that despite her tragedy, the film wouldn't cast sharks as mindless killers, but as apex predators acting on instinct in their natural habitat. By the time a full year had passed, she had transformed from victim to advocate. Yekaterina used her platform to educate people about the importance of marine conservation and responsible tourism. She spoke at events, sharing her story not as a cautionary tale meant to instill fear, but as a lesson in respect for the wild. While she would never again wade into the open ocean, she had found a new purpose that allowed her to remain connected to the world she loved, even from a safe distance. In the summer of 2009, a group of fishermen set sail from a small coastal village in the Philippines, heading into the vast and unpredictable waters of the Sulu Sea. Among them was Rafael Torres, a 45-year-old seasoned fisherman known for his deep knowledge of the ocean and his resilience against its dangers. The crew of 6 men had embarked on what was supposed to be a routine multi-day fishing expedition. relying on their instincts and experience to navigate the open sea. The waters of the Sulu Sea were as rich with marine life as they were notorious for their lurking predators. Tiger sharks, known for their aggressive tendencies, prowled these depths, though attacks on humans were rare. Aware of the risks, the fishermen carried on with their work as they had countless times before, casting their nets in the early morning light and pulling in their catches with precision. On the second night, the ocean grew restless as a storm brewed in the distance. The boat, a modest wooden vessel reinforced for rough waters, bobbed violently against the rising waves. The men worked swiftly, securing their gear and preparing for the worst. Despite their precautions, a rogue wave slammed into the side of the boat with tremendous force, sending Raphael and 2 others overboard. The men on deck scrambled to throw ropes and life preservers into the water, their shouts barely audible over the howling wind and crashing surf. Raphael resurfaced, disoriented but conscious, gulping in mouthfuls of salt water as he struggled to keep afloat. The other 2 men fought against the current, slowly progressing toward the boat, but Raphael drifted farther away. The storm intensified, making a swift rescue nearly impossible. With no choice but to swim toward the nearest visible landmass, a small, uninhabited island several miles away, Raphael steeled himself for the grueling journey ahead. The hours dragged on as Raphael pushed through exhaustion and the relentless pull of the sea. His body ached, and his limbs felt heavier with each stroke. Just when the distant shoreline seemed within reach, a sudden movement beneath him sent a surge of panic through his body. A massive tiger shark, its dark silhouette cutting through the murky water, had appeared just below. At first the shark circled him, drawn by the scent of sweat, fear, and possibly a minor scrape he had sustained during the fall. Raphael knew better than to thrash or panic. He tried to remain calm, maintaining a slow, deliberate pace, but the shark was persistent. It circled tighter, its curiosity escalating into something far more sinister. Then, without warning, the predator struck, clamping its powerful jaws onto Raphael's lower leg. The roar of the sea swallowed a piercing scream. The shark thrashed violently, dragging Raphael beneath the surface. Blood clouded the water as he struggled, kicking at the predator with his free leg, but the beast was relentless. The fishermen on the boat, helpless against the raw power of nature, could only watch in horror as Raphael was pulled deeper and deeper, his form disappearing beneath the waves. The attack was over in seconds. The water settled, save for the ripples of disturbed currents and a dark stain spreading outward. Raphael never resurfaced. Back on the boat, the crew was gripped with shock and grief. With the storm still raging, they had no choice but to retreat, their hearts heavy with the weight of their loss. When they finally reached the safety of their village, they relayed the tragic news. The community mourned Raphael, holding a small ceremony in his honor. His family, though devastated, found some solace in the knowledge that he had died in the waters he had spent his life mastering. The attack reignited fears in the local fishing communities, a grim reminder of the ocean's unpredictable dangers. Though tiger sharks had always been a part of these waters, the knowledge that one had claimed the life of one of their own made every venture into the sea a more daunting endeavor. Even seasoned fishermen cast their nets with a renewed sense of caution, knowing that beneath the shimmering surface, predators lurked, waiting for their moment to strike. The following weeks saw a noticeable shift in the village. Some fishermen, shaken by the tragedy, hesitated to return to sea. In contrast, others clung to the belief that Raphael's fate was an anomaly, an unfortunate twist of nature that could not define their livelihood. Superstitions spread, with elders claiming that the sea had demanded a sacrifice, while younger men debated whether it was time to find safer waters for their trade. Yet no matter the beliefs, Raphael's absence was felt like a deep wound in the community. After hearing about the attack, a group of divers from the nearest city arrived at the village. They sought to study the shark population in the area, hoping to understand if the aggression was part of a larger pattern. Some villagers opposed their efforts, fearing that disturbing the balance of the sea would only invite more misfortune. Others, desperate for answers, supported learning more about the creatures that shared their waters. The divers set out on multiple expeditions, capturing footage of the sharks, studying their migration habits, and advising the fishermen on ways to reduce future encounters. Months passed, and the ocean's pull proved too strong for many fishermen to resist. Despite the fears, they returned to their boats, their hands again casting nets into the depths. Rafael's eldest son, Miguel, barely in his 20s, took his father's place among the crew. Though grief weighed heavily on him, he refused to let fear dictate his fate. Every time he ventured out, he carried a small wooden carving of his father's favorite fish, a symbol of protection and remembrance. On quiet nights when the waves were calm, the fishermen would sit together, speaking in hushed tones about Rafael's last moments. Some swore that on the darkest nights, when the sea was eerily still, they could see a figure just beyond the reach of their lanterns, a lone swimmer making his way toward shore, forever chasing the safety that had eluded him on that fateful night. 2016, the crystal-clear waters of the Red Sea near Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, concealed danger beneath their azure surface. This region, renowned for its vibrant coral reefs and diverse marine ecosystem, had been a premier diving destination for decades. The Egyptian coastal city had weathered political instability and occasional tourism downturns, but its underwater paradise remained a constant draw for enthusiasts worldwide. Among the regular visitors was Hassan Khalil, a 42-year-old Egyptian spearfisher with 15 years of experience navigating these waters. Hassan grew up in Alexandria but relocated to Sharm el-Sheikh to pursue his passion for the sea. He operated a small dive shop catering to tourists seeking authentic local experiences rather than commercial excursions. His reputation for understanding the Red Sea's intricate ecosystem earned him respect among locals and international diving communities. Though married with 3 children, Hassan often ventured into deeper waters, preferring solitude when hunting. On April 18th, Hassan informed his assistant Tariq Fawaz that he would be spearfishing at a site locals called the Canyon, approximately 2 kilometers offshore. The location was known for larger pelagic fish and occasional visits from oceanic white-tip sharks. These sharks, once abundant throughout tropical oceans, had declined in numbers but maintained a presence in the Red Sea. Marine biologists consider oceanic whitetips among the more dangerous shark species, particularly in open water scenarios, due to their opportunistic nature and boldness. Hassan set out shortly after dawn in his small motorboat, equipped with his custom spear gun, diving knife, and catch bag. The weather conditions were ideal: minimal wind, excellent visibility, and calm seas. He anchored at his preferred spot and prepared for several hours of hunting. According to his diving watch recovered later, he completed 2 successful dives before the incident, reaching depths of approximately 25 meters. On his 3rd dive, Hassan spotted and successfully speared a sizable grouper. The struggle with the powerful fish likely produced vibrations and blood in the water, signals that can attract predators from considerable distances. Marine biologists later theorized that an oceanic white-tip shark detected these distress signals and moved toward Hassan from deeper waters. The shark, estimated to be a 3-meter female, approached as Hassan secured his catch. Oceanographic researcher Dr. Amina Saeed would later explain that the shark likely perceived the struggling fish as potential food rather than targeting Hassan himself. However, when Hassan attempted to protect his catch, the dynamic shifted. The shark, now in predatory mode, attacked with sudden ferocity. The first strike was catastrophic. The shark's powerful jaws closed around Hassan's right arm just below the elbow, severing it almost instantly. The force of the attack tore his buoyancy compensator and caused him to lose his regulator. Disoriented and rapidly losing blood, Hassan struggled toward the surface, approximately 15 meters above. 2 American tourists, Bradley Thompson and Justine Winters, were snorkeling about 100 meters away when they noticed an unusual water disturbance. Through their masks, they observed what appeared to be a diver in distress and a large shadow circling beneath. A former lifeguard, Thompson immediately alerted their guide on a nearby boat. The guide, Mahmoud Salah, quickly directed the boat toward Hassan's position, grabbing emergency oxygen and first aid supplies. By the time they reached the area, Hassan had managed to surface, but blood had spread visibly through the water. Mahmoud reported seeing Hassan desperately trying to climb onto his anchored boat, his right arm missing below the elbow. As Mahmoud maneuvered their vessel closer, additional shadows appeared in the water. The scent of blood had attracted at least 2 more oceanic whitetips to the scene. Mahmoud shouted warnings and extended a rescue pole toward Hassan, who was now just 5 meters from safety. In a moment that would haunt witnesses for years, the original shark returned. striking Hassan from below with such force that he was lifted partially out of the water before being dragged beneath the surface. Despite Mahmoud's protests, Thompson dove in but quickly retreated when one of the sharks approached him. The rescue boat circled the area for 20 minutes, hoping Hassan would resurface. Egyptian Coast Guard vessels arrived 30 minutes later, beginning a 3-day search operation. Hassan's body was never recovered. Only his severed hand, still wearing his diving watch, floated to the surface, along with his damaged spear gun. The incident sent shockwaves through the local diving community. Hassan's widow, Fatima Khalil, established a foundation promoting shark awareness and diver safety in her husband's memory. The foundation worked with local authorities to implement new safety protocols for solo divers, including mandatory tracking devices and partner systems. Marine biologist Dr. Saeed used the tragedy to advocate for a better understanding of oceanic white-tip behavior. She emphasized that while the sharks had behaved as predators, such attacks remained extraordinarily rare. Her research team tracked and tagged several oceanic white-tips in the region, providing valuable data on their movements and feeding patterns. Hassan's dive shop continued operating under Tariq's management, with some proceeds supporting the Safety Foundation. A memorial plaque at the harbor reminded visitors of the Red Sea's beauty and potential dangers. Local guides included Hassan's story in their safety briefings, emphasizing that respectful coexistence with marine predators required knowledge and caution. The incident reinforced the deadly reputation of oceanic white-tips, particularly in open water scenarios where injured prey or humans might trigger predatory responses. Jacques Cousteau had once described this species as the most dangerous of all sharks, particularly in shipwreck scenarios, an assessment tragically validated by Hassan's fate. Egyptian tourism officials acknowledged the tragedy but worked to contextualize the attack's rarity. They implemented enhanced monitoring systems for shark activity near popular diving sites and required all spearfishers to use shark shields, electronic devices designed to deter sharks through electromagnetic pulses. Annually, on the anniversary of Hassan's disappearance, local divers conducted a memorial dive, placing flowers on the water above the canyon. His children, Amira, Ziad, and little Kareem, grew up knowing their father as someone who respected the sea, even as it ultimately claimed him. Following in his father's footsteps, Ziad became a marine conservationist, though he chose to study sharks from research vessels rather than through spearfishing. The witnesses to Hassan's final moments rarely spoke publicly about what they had seen. Thompson returned to the United States and became an advocate for shark conservation, often noting the statistical rarity of fatal attacks compared to the millions of sharks killed annually by humans. Justine Winters wrote a single powerful article for a diving magazine, concluding that what happened to Hassan Khalil represented not the malevolence of nature but its indifference, a predator behaving as evolution had designed it to, in waters humans entered as guests rather than masters. The boat bobbed gently in the cold, clear waters of Gansbai, the early morning sun casting a soft light across the sea as the cool breeze swept through the air. 3 couples, Nina and Mark, Sarah and James, and Ellie and Tom, had set out for a boat ride, excited for a peaceful morning on the water. They'd planned this trip for months, eager to enjoy the beauty of South Africa's coast and, for the women, a chance to snorkel in the rich, teeming waters. The husbands, a little more cautious but content to stay aboard, were looking forward to the view and the quiet as their wives had fun. Nina, always the adventurous one, was the first to slip into the water, her breath sharp with anticipation as she donned her snorkel mask. Sarah followed, her excitement palpable, while Ellie hesitated for a moment, her fingers grazing the cool surface before she, too, submerged herself into the sea. The water felt alive beneath them, cold and soothing, with the light filtering through in patterns across the sea floor. The women swam farther out from the boat, laughing and pointing out the fish that darted past. For a moment, everything felt perfect, serene even. But Mark's smile faded as he looked at the horizon, the unease creeping into his gut. He squinted into the distance, his eyes narrowing as the stillness of the water seemed to ripple unnaturally. He wasn't alone. James and Tom, standing side by side, also sensed something wasn't quite right, their eyes scanning the waves. The water around the women was so clear they could see straight down to the sandy bottom. They moved freely, marveling at the fish, but their carefree joy would be short-lived. A shadow passed beneath them, driving fast, its silhouette unmistakable. It was huge, a monster from the deep, A low ripple surged through the water and Sarah's heart skipped. She paused, instinctively looking around her. Her breath came harder, her pulse quickening as she noticed the strange stillness in the water. No fish, no movement, just emptiness. Panic surged, but the shape below them became clearer, darker, and massive before she could speak. The size of it was incomprehensible. It rose from the depths, its form taking shape as it shot toward them with astonishing speed. A great white shark. Nina screamed first, a high-pitched shriek that echoed above the water. She kicked her legs, desperate to swim back to the boat, but the shark was faster. It darted toward her, its jaws opening wide, the gaping jaws lined with serrated teeth. Mark saw the shark lunge, and his stomach dropped. It was happening too quickly. There was no time for anyone to act. The shark clamped down on Nina's leg, the force of the bite pulling her under the surface. Her body jerked, her face a mask of agony as the water turned red. Mark was frozen in horror, unable to do anything. He screamed for Nina, but she was already submerged. The shark twisted, its powerful tail swiping violently through the water. It dragged her deeper, pulling her away from the others in safety. Sarah screamed next, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she whipped her head around trying to find a way back to the boat. Her movements were erratic, and she became the next target. The shark, sensing her panic, spun toward her with unnatural precision. Before she could react, it slammed into her, knocking her off balance. She felt the sharp, brutal impact as the shark's teeth sank into her arm, the pain excruciating. She tried to scream, to fight, but the shark dragged her under with terrifying force, pulling her into the abyss. Ellie watched in horror, her entire body frozen with fear. She was helpless. The water around her was a churn of bubbles and splashing, her friends gone instantly. She turned to swim back toward the boat, but her legs trembled beneath her. The ship was so far away now. Every stroke took more energy than she had. Then, like a dark shadow, the shark appeared again, closing in on her. It came from behind, fast, its immense body cutting through the water like a bullet. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. She kicked harder, trying to escape, but it was useless. The shark lunged, its powerful jaws snapping shut around her leg, dragging her back down with the terrifying speed of its assault. Ellie felt herself being pulled helpless against its strength. She fought, kicking, struggling, but it was no use. The last thing she saw before the water closed in around her was the boat, a distant, unreachable speck in the distance. Mark, Tom, and James were screaming from the boat now, their voices filled with terror, their hands gripping the sides of the ship as they called to their wives. But the words were meaningless. The women were gone. The shark had claimed them all in a matter of moments. The water was now eerily still, save for the lingering bubbles and the faintest traces of blood that clouded the surface. In those few minutes, everything had changed. The calm morning had turned into a nightmare. Once so beautiful, the sea was now an indifferent graveyard. The husbands were panicking beside themselves, shouting into the radio for help. They didn't know what to do, their minds racing with hopelessness. Minutes felt like hours as they waited for rescue, but it was too late when the Coast Guard arrived. The women had vanished beneath the waves, their bodies lost to the ocean's depths. The rescue teams could do little more than search for hours, their efforts futile as they combed the waters in vain. No traces remained. Experts would later say that the shark was likely drawn by the splashing and erratic movements of the group, as well as the disorienting disturbance in the water. The chaos had attracted the predator, triggering its instincts. But for the husbands who had watched helplessly, the explanation did little to ease their grief. The waters of Gansbai had become the site of an unimaginable loss. Evan Carter was no stranger to the ocean's mysteries. As a marine biologist, his career had been shaped by a deep connection with the sea and its creatures. At 42, with years of research and fieldwork behind him, Evan had come to the waters off Western Australia for one purpose: to observe a rare migration of sharks, an event that only occurred once every few years. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment, high-definition cameras, tracking devices, and sonar, he was determined to capture groundbreaking footage, something that would change the way the world viewed these apex predators. The sea was calm that morning, the surface a smooth sheet of blue, the sun shining like a spotlight on the expanse below. Evan descended slowly, his descent guided by the rhythmic rise and fall of his breath, steady despite the excitement buzzing inside him. Around him, the water seemed alive, vibrant with movement as tiger sharks drifted by. They were curious but not aggressive, a beautiful presence in the clear water, drawn to the strange hum of his gear, but not feeling threatened. Evan had studied these sharks for years. He knew their behavior, patterns, and nuances. However, he wasn't prepared for what would come next. The first few hours passed with relative calm. He filmed the tiger sharks as they swam past, their striped bodies cutting through the water like silent specters. Their curious eyes glanced at him, but they didn't approach too closely. Evan checked his equipment, ensured the cameras were recording, and noted the GPS data on his screen. Everything was going according to plan. Until it didn't. Without warning, the mood of the water shifted. Evan's hand froze over the controls as something massive darkened the water around him. He looked up, scanning the depths above him. At first it seemed like nothing, just the swirling shadows that sometimes played tricks on the eyes in the deep blue. But then the creature became focused, and the world suddenly felt much smaller. A great white shark, the true king of the ocean, materialized from like a shadow come to life. Its sheer size was staggering, far larger than any shark Evan had ever encountered. The water around him seemed to freeze as the shark circled, its movements slow but deliberate. It moved with an almost eerie grace, the vast expanse of its body cutting through the water with a calm that belied its immense power. Evan's heart thudded in his chest as he watched the creature move closer. His breath, once controlled and measured, now came faster, harder, and his fingers hovered over the camera controls, unsure what to do. He had trained for this moment. He had studied sharks for years. But this was different. This predator was at the peak of its power, and he was a trespasser in its domain. Sensing the incoming danger, the tiger sharks scattered like frightened fish as the great white entered their midst. They moved quickly, disappearing into the shadows as if instinctively knowing what would unfold. Evan's mind raced, the chill of fear slowly creeping in. He tried to steady his breath, keeping his movements slow, deliberate. He was just an observer now, nothing more. The great white swam around him, its dark eyes fixed on him, its gaze heavy, almost calculating. Evan felt a shiver run down his spine as the shark circled closer. There was no malice in its movements, but there was something predatory, something primal. It wasn't aggression, at least not yet, but curiosity, the kind of curiosity that often led to danger. Evan adjusted the camera, trying to steady his shaking hands, aiming to capture the perfect shot. The shark's presence was suffocating, its size dominating the space around him. Suddenly, without warning, the great white surged forward. The water around Evan erupted as the shark darted towards him with a terrifying speed, knocking him off balance. His body jerked sideways as the force of the shark's rush sent him tumbling into the water, struggling to regain control. Panic surged through him, a sudden realization hitting him. He was all alone, facing one of the world's most terrifying predators. Evan's heart raced as he tried to steady himself. His mind screamed to ascend and break free of the shark's path, but his limbs felt heavy and sluggish, as if the water was fighting against him. He kicked harder, trying to force his body upward to escape, but the great white wasn't done. The shark turned on him again with a violent flick of its tail. It darted forward with precision, its mouth opening wide, its rows of teeth gleaming in the sun-dappled water. Evan barely had time to react before the shark's jaws clamped down on the hose connecting his air tank to his regulator. The world around him spun as the shark yanked the hose violently, tearing it free with a force that left Evan gasping, the sound of his breath coming out in short, panicked bursts. His air supply was gone. The tank was useless now, the hose dangling like a lifeline severed. Panic threatened to overwhelm him as he struggled to reach for his backup regulator, but the shark was relentless. It tugged at him with unnerving strength, its mouth just inches from his body, its massive frame pressing against him in the water. Every movement dragged him deeper, pulling him into the cold abyss. Evan fought to kick, to break free and rise. He pushed against the weight of the water, each stroke feeling like a battle against an unseen force. But the shark was faster, stronger. It circled him again, its huge body moving through the water like a nightmare, its cold eyes never leaving his. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped. He tried to push away, but the weight of the ocean and the pressure of the shark's presence seemed to crush him. His lungs screamed for air, but there was none. His vision blurred as panic gripped him, his hands reaching desperately for anything, for any way to escape. The camera on his chest, still recording, captured everything. The shark's massive form looming over him, the terror in his eyes as the realization set in. His fingers grasped at the water around him, his body jerking with the effort to stay conscious, to survive. But the great white was too powerful. And then, just like that, the camera's last frame captured Evan's face, full of terror as he was pulled deeper into the shadowy depths. The screen flickered, the image of him vanishing beneath the surface. His body was never recovered. Weeks later, the camera was washed ashore and ultimately recovered by Evan's team. The footage told them a grim story. It revealed the moment a predator became unavoidable.